Today, protests against Maduro in Venezuela as the opposition says it has proof it won the election.
Ahead of leaving office, Biden tries to rein in the Supreme Court. McDonald's earnings send shockwaves through the fast food industry.
Olympic embarrassment as the triathlon is postponed over Seine pollution.
And Harris's border record comes into focus. It's Tuesday, July 30th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes every weekday. I'm Jonah Green in New York.
And I'm David Spencer in London.
A 6-week ban on abortion went into effect Monday in Iowa. It's the 22nd state to impose broad restrictions on ending pregnancies since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. That ruling is now just one of many that the 6-3 conservative court has made in recent years that's caused a right-wing lurch in American law. That and a series of ethical concerns over bias in accepting lavish gifts has created a crisis of confidence in the court.
Supreme Court's current ethics code is weak and, even more frightening, voluntary.
On Monday, President Joe Biden proposed sweeping changes to the High Court, including 18-year term limits and a binding code of conduct for its 9 justices.
Term limits would help ensure that the court membership changes with some regularity, reduce the chance that any single presidency imposes undue influence in generations to come.
Biden also called for a constitutional amendment to eliminate broad presidential immunity recognized in a recent Supreme Court ruling involving former President Donald Trump.
We're a nation of laws, not kings and dictators.
Opposition from Republicans in Congress means the proposals have little chance of passing.
Protests on the streets of the Caracas neighborhood Ucatia against the election results that declared President Nicolas Maduro the winner. Many rode motorbikes and wore masks, while others joined traditional Latin American protests where people bang pots and pans. Venezuela's opposition says it has proof it won the election and has called for more protests today.
Hemos estado haciendo seguimiento.
In a live broadcast from the presidential palace, Maduro said his forces were acting against what he called violent protesters organized by the extreme right.
Estamos actuando.
Julia Sims-Cobb is in Caracas and explains why there's a dispute over the result.
The results released by the National Electoral Council, which is supposed to be an independent body, but which the opposition considers an arm of the government, gave Maduro 51% of the vote and Gonzalez 44%. That contradicts the independent polling that was coming out ahead of the vote, and it also contradicts exit polls that were released by independent pollsters, all of which gave Gonzalez the win, usually with about 65% of the vote. The opposition itself says that Gonzalez won 70%.
So what happens now?
There are huge barriers for the opposition to gather official evidence that will support their claim about the election being stolen. That's because they are supposed to have a legal right to these voting records that are printed out for each ballot box. But those are very hard to get if you don't get them in the moment of the count. And there were a lot of reports that they were not able in many places to get those records. They've said they have about 40% of them. There are some handwritten records, some photos that people who are at polling stations, opposition witnesses, are posting on social media and presumably sending to opposition headquarters. Whether they'll be able to verify that or whether the government would accept any of that potential evidence remains to be seen.
Dozens of people have died after landslides swept through homes in southern India's Kerala state. Hillsides collapsed after heavy rain and sent rivers of mud and water through villages. The list of candidates that could run with Kamala Harris for the White House has narrowed, with North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer both saying they're out. The high-stakes decision has taken center stage since Vice President Harris became the Democratic frontrunner. The men's individual triathlon at the Paris Olympics has been delayed until Wednesday because of pollution levels in the River Seine. Swimming training sessions were cancelled on Sunday and Monday because the river was deemed unsafe.
Earnings season is in for a full flight, and investors are hanging on for any signs about inflation. One company already causing ripples is fast food giant McDonald's, reporting that global sales had fallen for the first time in more than 3 years. Waylon Cunningham covers the fast food industry. Waylon, why are consumers staying away from the yellow arches?
Because of inflation for the most part. The McDonald's, which for years has been known as cheap, easy, and convenient, maybe isn't so cheap anymore. And so that has taken a real bite out of consumer demand for the company. Part of this decline is also due to a sort of informal boycott that we're seeing in a lot of Muslim-majority countries.
So how are they combating this slump?
McDonald's CEO Chris Kempczynski said that they needed to have what he called a comprehensive rethink in some markets to lure customers back. Low-income consumers in particular seem to be responding really well to this $5 value meal. One issue for McDonald's is they're trying to offer value to their consumers, but any value deal has to go through franchisees. These are the local business owners that actually own the overwhelming majority of McDonald's stores. When discounts are too big, these franchisees lose money. The $5 deal was subsidized by Coke, which has dramatically helped things out.
So she was the border czar, but she never went to the border, right?
A familiar Republican attack line against Vice President Kamala Harris these days is that as Biden's, quote, border czar, she's been terrible on immigration. Reporter Ted Hesson has been looking into Harris's immigration record. So Ted, first, what can you tell us about this role of a so-called border czar?
The truth is that that was never her job, and even though Republicans have used that as an attack line, what she had been assigned in early 2021 at the start of this administration was a much narrower portfolio to work on diplomatic efforts with a few countries in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, with the idea of driving down the migration numbers from those countries. And most notably, marshaled, first of all, U.S. funds for the effort, but also convened private sector companies and worked to get them to invest in the region as well.
Did she see results?
Well, first of all, the Harris campaign and her allies are saying that she was successful on this mission of lowering numbers of migration from Central America. It's not so clear-cut. The numbers have definitely gone down from the beginning of the Biden administration, but there are many factors involved. It's not just what the White House is doing. There are also societal factors within these countries that may drive people to the U.S.
How does the Harris campaign plan to counter Trump's attacks that she's responsible for all border security issues?
The focus has really been on painting Trump as an extremist, as somebody who had a policy to separate migrant families at the U.S.-Mexico border. In addition to that, they're responding by saying that Trump torpedoed a bipartisan bill in the U.S. Senate that President Biden had endorsed, and with Harris as his vice president, that would have boosted border security. And Trump had told Republicans to vote against it, which they're portraying as a partisan act to try and boost the issue before the election. So those are the two main attack lines that, at the moment, we're expecting the Harris campaign to fight back with.
That's almost it for today's edition of Reuters World News. Before we go, our recommended read takes us to Singapore and a seafood restaurant where the fish head curry now comes with a new side order featuring crunchy crickets. It's the first eatery in Singapore to put insects on the menu after the stringent food authority there approved for human consumption 16 species, which also includes grasshoppers, grubs, and mealworms. There's a link to that story in the pod description. For more on all of today's stories, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show. And to never miss an episode, subscribe on your favourite podcast player.